Hi, my name is K.Thomas, W1DED. Today I have with me a guest that's been with me before, James Gallo, KB2FMH. James just got back from Cuba where he participated in a DXpedition, and I just wanted to have him on the air so we could talk about that and talk about the interaction he had with callers while he was there. Hi, James.
Hello, Kevin. Thanks for having me back.
Absolutely. So let's start with Cuba and this opportunity you had to go there for a DXpedition. Tell me about how that all got started.
A friend of mine who happens to be the U.S. liaison for a big IOTA club called Russian Robinson Club. We were looking to go to the South Pacific somewhere after our adventure last year on Kiska Island in the Aleutians, which was a fabulous event, but cold, wet, damp wind all the time. It was a little bit uncomfortable, but we still had a great time. So we wanted to go somewhere opposite of that. We were looking around the Samoan Islands in that area, and we had our eye on an island called Rose Atoll off American Samoa. Very rarely activated as an IOTA. Not so much DXCC because it's part of American Samoa, which people operate and live there. Not often, but you can get them. It's not like Bouvet where it's once in a lifetime. So we couldn't get that after finding that some other group had secured permission to access, which is limited to every 3 years. So we'd have to wait until 26 to go. So he said, I'll find another place. I forgot about it. And then maybe in mid early February, I got an email saying, "How'd you like to go to Cuba? We not let's try. We're going to Cuba for the 30th anniversary of our club. We've decided that we did it on the 20th. We want to go back. Are you in?" I said, "If they'll let me in, I'm going." I mean, you never turn down an opportunity to go on these expeditions because it's fun. Yeah, it digs into your pocket a little bit, but that's the cost of enjoying your hobby, I suppose. You know that. You've been around the block a few times yourself, Kevin. So the plans were made, paperwork was learned about, filled out, operators were secured, a few backed out, a couple more joined, then they backed out. It ended up being just myself and one other U.S. operator, the NA liaison, who comes from the Northwest area, Pacific Northwest. He had to fly. He had to go to Vancouver and then fly to Montreal and then fly down to Cuba with probably about 1,000 pounds in equipment, which was just radios and amps and such. The two local Cuban operators provided all the antennas. We enlisted the help of the Las Tunas Contest Club. So we had one of their founders, CO8 Zulu Zulu, and another one of their members, a very good, excellent phone operator, I might say. If you saw him on any of the videos linked from our site, you'd understand. He is C Charlie Oscar 2 X Ray November. Very good guy named Jose. So those two provided all the antennas that they use for their contesting, mostly VDAs, if you're familiar with that style of antenna, vertical dipole arrays. And then we had two Russians come from Siberia, the president of the club, one of the founders, and another very good operator who does all modes, but he particularly likes satellite. So we found him on a roof one of the last few days we were there with his satellite antenna, a little chair and table sitting up there in his pajamas, making hundreds of satellite contacts. So the trip going there was not unpleasant. I mean, a lot of flights. As I mentioned in our pre meeting, I had the layover to catch the Cuba flight at 8 a.m. I had to get there the night before and stay in a local hotel and make sure I woke up on time. Flight to Cuba was great, quick, less than an hour. Um, Once we arrived, taxis, lots of old cars. If you've ever seen movies about Cuba, it's true. It's like they're stuck in the 40s and 50s. If you remember that scene in The Godfather where they were in Cuba, uh, giving the guy the golden phone, and then the takeover by Fidel, and they had to exit. All those 1940s, 1950s American cars are coveted there. The buildings are uh, beautiful architecture, reminiscent of that period with pastel paint jobs, beautiful plaster work on the facades, ironwork on fences. Every building is different, unlike the U.S., where you'll see rows of development houses that all look the same. Everything there is absolutely different, but so is the conditions. Between the airport and the first town of Morone, where the other U.S. op and I had to stay, thanks to government rules, um, it's it's not a nice place when you go through it like that. Very, I don't want to say poor, but impoverished. People walking, bicycling, horses, donkeys, mules, cows in the street, abandoned, just dried up farms, kids playing with animals, uh, roughshod. The hotel inside was nice. I'm going to call it a hostel or a B&B. It was more like a boarding house that we stayed. But the operating area was a lovely resort on the beach in Cayo Coco, government owned. That's why we couldn't stay there. But we could operate there because the Russians had no problem at all staying there because Russia and Cuba have a great relationship. They communicate and they do business. So we set up on the ground floor in a room, ocean view, facing the Caribbean Sea, with all the room we needed for as many antennas and wires as we could string out. Thanks to the management of the hotel being accommodating to us, they gave us that set of rooms in the back so we wouldn't disturb anyone. We're literally the, right on the beach. 15 steps and we're on the surf. Another 5 steps and you're in the sea. So we had a really great location. There's some photos of it and some videos on our QRZ page for anyone interested. Charlie Oscar Zero RRC on QRZ. Overall, Cuba is a terrific place. I love it. I want to go back. I was invited by the Las Tunas Contest Club to come operate with them in March for the big ARRL International SSB DX contest. So I'm going to do my best to honor that invitation and find another way there. They offered to accommodate me. Another beach location, but on Cuba proper, not an island, but on the northern shore in the Caribbean. They have a couple of houses one of their members has, and they set up there. So that's something I'm looking forward to outside of the usual, where do we go next in the expedition world, which is famously written by Marty Lane. I don't know if anybody's ever seen his book. The title is Where Do We Go Next? And that's what all expeditionists say. As they wrap up the one they're on, they start talking about, okay, guys, now that we're all here, where's the next place? You never know where it's going to end up, where you're going to be on Earth. So that's the gist of the trip itself. Any questions on it?
Absolutely. A lot of information there, James. The one thing that I think was missing was I suspect that it was somewhat complicated to get permission to travel there and to operate and to get a license. Tell me about that. How did you get approvals as an American to go to Cuba?
The local Cubans got the license via the president of the big radio club that covers almost all of Cuba. It's Federation of Radio Communications, FRC. Don't confuse it with the Frankfurt Radio Club here on the East Coast. That's very big. Their FRC is their Federation of Radio Communications. So that gentleman, the president, got us to secure the license with the Cuban Telecommunications Authority, and myself and Yuri and N3QQ had to fill out half a dozen forms for conditional visas to travel there under the auspices of providing instruction on emergency communications. So that's how we got there. A lot of paperwork by the U.S. Department of State and the Cuban Ministry of Travel. No problem leaving the U.S. except when I was about to on the line for my boarding pass. I thought I could pre-check in like you do everywhere else. You get your boarding pass a day or ahead of time on the phone. You can't do it with international, especially Cuba. So I had to get it there, and I was told by some, I guess, a line manager, "Do you have this form?" And he showed me something. I said, "No." He said, "Well, you need that to get there. You'll need that when you get off the plane there, but you can get it quickly on the web." So he helped me do it on my phone. I filled something out. I got it to where it was done. I took a screenshot, and that's all I needed was to show a screenshot with a QR code that they could scan when I disembarked in Cuba, and then went through their customs. They looked at my passport. They didn't stamp it. I was hoping to come back with a stamp. I've never traveled abroad, so my passport is virgin. I thought I'm going to get a stamp that says Cuba like everybody has on their passports. No such thing. They just look at it and they scan it. No, they leave no trace. I was never there. They don't communicate with the United States at all. They don't say that I was there. They don't ask questions. They don't tell anybody. So once I got home, I was never there. But when I passed through that, and I'm now dragging my bag through the main terminal going out to the street, I was stopped by a young gentleman in immigration who said he just had a few questions. I suppose I stood out as the only American, and I mean, I looked different than everybody else there. A New Yorker, walking around the Cuban airport like I own the place. And he asked some questions. He brought me to a table off to the side where some woman was playing on a computer. And as we're talking, he spoke English very well. I explained to him my purpose, what we're doing. The equipment's being brought by someone else. I had to show him the list of operators, the copy of the license from Cuba, the signatures by their officials that allowed me there. And it turns out that he knew about it, about amateur radio. He asked me what frequencies I'll be on, and I said whatever the approved amateur radio frequencies are for Cuba, that's where we'll be transmitting and receiving around the world, not just the U.S., everywhere. Lo and behold, the woman, an older woman, I say older because he was in his 20s. She was about in her 40s or early 50s. She said to him in Spanish, she heard my call sign use. Apparently, her husband is a very active radio amateur in Cuba, and she knew all about it. And she said he was talking about the people coming for this operation because it's a big talk in Cuba because it's a rarity that you get two Russians and two Americans coming to play radio in your country. So we were already well received in that aspect. The trip going home was different. U.S. Customs gave me hell. I breezed through Cuba. They didn't even ask, do you have any money? Do you taking out cigarettes, tobacco, or liquor? They did ask me if I had any lighters because they saw a cigarette pack. So I said to the guy, "Yeah, I have a lighter." He took it, as you put your stuff in the trays to go through the X-ray. He took my lighter, directed me to go stand up for the scan. They don't have the fancy body scan devices. They do it with the wand, like the old nightclubs used to do. So while I'm doing that, I didn't realize. I learned later. He put the lighter back in my cigarette pack as a courtesy, because I guess he realized I'm just looking to go home. I'm not going to blow up the plane with a Bic. So I was looking to find matches to go have a smoke out on the tarmac because it's not a gangway type of airport like we know. You go out on the tarmac and you climb a ladder like the old movies to get on the planes. You go up one of those portable on the wheels ladders. It was covered in case of rain, but still a ladder up to the jet. So when I finally got out and I opened the cigarettes after scrounging for matches. I saw the lighter and I just smiled, saying, "What a nice guy." He knew I posed no threat. When I got off the plane in Miami to go catch my connection to New York, U.S. immigration detained me. Wait, I sat for almost an hour in a room waiting to be called, and then I saw one guy wanted to know what I'm doing. Another guy asked why was I there? Did I bring any alcohol or tobacco? And I said I have no cigars, but I have a pack of cigarettes I bought locally. And he said, that's tobacco. You're not supposed to bring tobacco. Go sit over there. And I waited again. And then a young fella in civilian clothes like you and I comes out calling my name. He says, "All right, hey, Mister." He's calling me James Gallo. And I said, no, I corrected him. I said, it's Gallo, Italian from New York. He said, I'm sorry, I never expected an Italian guy. I thought it was Spanish, coming from Cuba. I said, no, I'm on my way home to New York. So he said, come with me. I just have some questions. Bring your bags. He casually goes through my bags on the table. And I said, this is reminding me of that TV show, To Catch a Smuggler. So he laughed. He said, I was in an episode last season. If you could go back last season, you'll see me. I said, "You're not recording me for next season, are you?" He said, "No, there are no cameras in here. No hidden cameras. If we're recording, you'll see the cameraman." So we start talking about radio. I happen to have some QSL cards from the K7K Kiska expedition that the Russians brought that we made special for the $100 or more donors, which I am tasked with sending. So he saw those, was interested in them. I said, "I have an extra. You can keep one if you want." He didn't want, he just was looking. Some other stuff I had to distribute radio related, some plaques for other awards. And then he called in some other girl, and then another girl came in, and they were all asking questions about amateur radio. How do how'd you get into it? How does it work? Who do you talk to? Why do you do it? Who else does it? And I said there are millions of people worldwide who are licensed to do it. And this past week, I probably got called by 500,000 of them. I only logged about 14,000, but at times it sounded like every ham on the planet was calling us because conditions just picked up after the third day of bad conditions from that sun fart last week. We got there on the 24th. We were on the air on the 25th, but it didn't get good till the 28th, and then conditions just popped. It was 10, 15, 12, 17, wide open all day, and at night 20. I was on 20 meters to Europe at 3 a.m. local time, which is equal to Eastern time, our time. It was just amazing. You know yourself, the conditions from closer to the equator are much different than up here in the Northeast. I mean, I was taking calls from Australia, China, Taiwan, all across the U.S., into the deepest parts of Siberia, Kaliningrad, Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, way out into Mongolia, all in the same time on 20 meters, within moments of each other. Extreme west across the U.S., extreme east. I was in my glory. Couldn't take the calls fast enough. But once they let me go, they understood. They said, "You're on your way." I said, "I'm going to be late for my connecting flight." The young gentleman in the civilian clothes was so kind. He said, "I'll make sure you get there." He had somebody come on one of those little golf carts they drive around the airports because Miami International is huge. I would have had to walk a mile and a half to my gate for the flight back to New York. He shuttled me there in a golf cart with my bags to ensure that I made my connecting flight. Apologized for detaining me for so long. And I said, "It's not all your fault. I probably talked a half hour more than I should because once you get me started talking about radio, you know well, you can't shut me up. So let me shut up now and turn it back to you."
So, James, I want to take you back. The one question, or the one thing you didn't really address was in that 1,000 pounds of gear that your buddy from the West Coast brought. What was that? What did you pack for equipment for an expedition like this?
Okay, we brought an ICOM 756 Pro 3, a 746 IC 746, two or three Sun SDRs made by Expert for the digital operation. They're tiny little 100-watt things, the size of a book, but it's all software defined. There's not a knob except on and off, and a microphone jack, like a modular one you find on the newer radios, like an RJ11. Two of those, and two Juma 1,000-watt amps to mate with those for the two FT8 stations we ran using small IBM ThinkPad laptops. One was a Dell something. The computers are irrelevant. They all ran the special software to do the Foxhound for expeditions, where you could operate and take 5 calls at a time on each screen. I'm not very familiar with FT8. I'm a human mode guy, but actually I began to watch it because when the conditions for voice are bad, the FT8 guys are still pulling in contact. So I began to learn, and I might dip my toe in it in a year or two. Not right now. We had SPE expert amps, 1.5Ks for the CW and phone. We had two of those. We had a spare 1.3K SPE expert as a backup. Um, we had a 705 that one of the Russians brought to use for the satellite with a small a small 100-watt amp portable that he used with a solar panel on the roof. He really brought a lot of crap. We had an assortment of bandpass filters, the small 200-watt ones to go between the radio and the amp, and then we had kilowatt ones to go between the amp and the antenna to ensure no IMD or coming back or no bleeding. We literally had the 20 meter, 15, 10, and 40 meter antennas out 10 to 15 feet apart from each other running kilowatts and no bleed, not even the little burps where you would get if you had a kilowatt of CW, let's say on 15, and you're doing phone on 40 because it's a harmonic. We didn't hear a burp. That's how good these filters were. Um, some of them, the bigger ones, were donated to the club last year for the Kiska expedition, donated generously by our friend Tim K3LR at DX Engineering. He also donated this headset I'm using to me as a courtesy because I said, Tim, I don't want to use my old sticky earbud headsets in Alaska. So he said, which one do you want? What color? I said, give me red. It'll stand out among the black sand and green moss if I drop them on the volcanic island. So I got a Pro 7 set in red with the custom the element is not the standard one. It's the one that makes my voice more punchy for the DXing and contesting at H4 or 5, I think, or whatever the equivalent is of that. And assorted wires and tools. We brought a slingshot in case we had to string a wire in a tree. Lots of coax, jumpers, patch cables. Uh, we had duplexers, which allowed um, two different radios on two different bands to merge to go to one coax to feed a dual band VDA. We had one of our vertical dipole arrays was for 12 and 17 fed by a single coax. So we had this device called a duplexer that allows a radio on 12 and a radio on 17 to share the single outlet to the antenna. Beyond my technical knowledge, but it worked. It works. We burnt a couple of the older high-powered filters. Thankfully, one of the Russian fellas, R9LR, had a bag of doorknob capacitors, which is what popped in one of these things, and he replaced it on the spot. Pulled out his little tool set, soldering pen, bag of capacitors, resistors, ceramic disc caps, all kinds of parts. He's a ready ranger. I said, "You're a Russian Boy Scout, ready to go." And he didn't speak English well, but he smiled and said, "Yes, yes, ready, ready. We'll fix." So that worked out okay.
So, James, it
And
sounds like there were a total of 6 people in the team. Is that right?
yes, my
And
two U.S., two Cuban, two Russian.
and how many people
We
were
had more,
operating?
but they backed out.
And how many people were operating at a time?
Up to four. Sometimes we convert one of the FTH stations to CW using the N1MM software. You just listen and you type the response. There was no paddle and no key. It's all digitally done through the software. But the operator still has to decode in his ear because the computer decoding is never really 100%. It's best to do it by ear, and you follow the rate that you hear. You could change the TX speeds. Word speed, paragraphs, well, letters, character speed, word speed is different. I don't know. I don't do much CW. I haven't done it since '86, but I think that's how it goes. There are different speeds. How fast the letter is and how fast the words are going. So we had always had one sideband station going, primarily me as the SSB operator. One of the Cubans, a great contester, he would take the SSB when I could no longer speak. I'd go for hours, but it's hot, Kevin. In the shade, in the room, with the back door and the front door open for a breeze, it's still 90 degrees. We were sucking down bottled water, 10, 12 bottles each a day, and you to sit in that and be sweating while you're talking, it puts a strain on you. So I do a couple hours. I give it to him. He does a couple.
Did your team operate 24 hours a day?
We did the best we could. I mean, I could be found in there at 3, 4, 5 in the morning, whenever conditions allowed. My viewpoint was, my goal was to go there to put the island and the park, and I'll get to that, on the air. Um, I of the 10 days I was there, I was in the Caribbean Sea only up to my short bottoms for all of 5 minutes, just so I could say I went in the beach while I'm here. I walked by two pools daily for meals. Never dipped a toe in the pool. I wasn't there for vacation. I was there to operate the radio and give as many contacts as possible. I think I personally pulled in about 4,200 of the 14,000 we did by voice. The bulk, 7,000 or so, was the digital because that's easier and it runs longer. And the remainder was CW, which did very well. We got about 3,000 plus in CW, and our main CW operator, the Cuban Raul from the Las Tunas Contest Club, CO8ZZ, great CW operator. That guy could hear through the pileup as good as good as any veteran DXer, but he could respond quickly. He was good. I'd say he was going up to 40 words a minute back and forth. If you called at 40, he heard you. If somebody called at 50, he'd say again, or however, AGN in CW, and he'd pick it up. He was just hitting enter, 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 racking up calls when conditions were good. But I'd like to say that there were times where my rate was exceeding his and the FT8's because, as a POTA activator, we experience pileups on a daily basis. These DXers or contesters, it's once, twice a year they get the big pileups. We do it every day. We make it look easy. I'm sitting there drinking my water, making notes, talking to people, and running, call sign, you're in the log, QRZ, up, 5 to 10 up, listening up, QRZ, boom, as I'm drinking water, smoking my cigarette, and talking to the guy who's doing something, playing with wires. And that's why they invited me down there because they appreciate my style.
How many QSOs did the entire team make over that 10-day period?
The total is 13,966 uniques.
So at that pace, tell me a little bit about that. Like you've explained, your training as a POTA operator, but you've also done DXpedition, so you know how to handle that side of the pileup. What could somebody that's calling into you learn from this experience? Like what would be the advice you'd give to somebody who's calling in?
Now we're getting to the meat and potatoes of this thing. I made notes because I want to be clear based on our discussion. I might look away to read my notes. The first thing is not all activations are the same. A lot of POTA folks go to a local park, somewhere they frequent often. They'll call CQ. They may run low power or 100 watts, compromised antennas, and they're casually operating. So if somebody calls in and you're 5'9" in Wisconsin, I'm 30 miles from the Canadian border. It's snowing here, or I'm going to walk my dog soon. I have two schnauzers. But, they have a little bit of a back and forth, and then okay, 7-3, next caller, please. When you get an activation that is from a rare location where many, many people are calling, we don't have time for the chit chat that you may find on a casual local activation. This is an island, so I've got IOTA people chasing me because it's a very rare IOTA entity. Upon learning that the location is within a Cuban national park, I added it to the POTA database to give an ATNO for everyone out there. And it's also a Cuba as a DX entity for those who don't have Cuba. There's not a lot of operators in Cuba. They don't have the best equipment because of the I guess the financial conditions among the people there. It's not a very capitalistic society like we have here, where people will blow tens of thousands of dollars on radio equipment to go play in a park. Not that everybody spends that much, but there are some of us who use exorbitant amounts of money to make our hobby more enjoyable. They're restricted, so we're at a fast pace. Our time is limited. Conditions are iffy, always changing, and our goal is to give as many contacts as possible. So, some of the things I would suggest to people are whether the activation is rare or local. That means they're not the same, but the basic code of conduct, the operating protocols should be followed because they are the same, whether it's the casual guy at 5 watts looking to do 10 contacts in an hour or a guy like me on a rare island with 1500 watts, antennas in the water, and I'm looking to do 10 contacts a minute because I have to satisfy the throng of people on the other side of that pileup. Um, so the goal is to listen, listen, listen. That's the first rule of any the DX code of conduct, the operator's code. Listen, hear what the activator says. Follow the rhythm and the style of the activator. If the activator is calling for one location, don't call out of turn. If I'm looking for Europe only, I don't want to hear a Kilo Charlie 4. I'm going to ignore you. If you're persistent, I'm going to waste time and say, US caller, I'm looking for EU only. I'm looking for Asia only, Oceania, whatever it is. I'm looking for this continent or this area only because that's where conditions are best for me. I can make more contacts where the propagation is stronger for me, even though you got a 10 element Yagi and a kilowatt and a half. I can hear you, but I'm not calling US. I'll get to you as conditions move. We follow the propagation. So listen, know the calls that you're asking, you're calling into. Quite often, I'd get somebody calling and calling, and I would acknowledge them, and I'd say, "You're 5'9" Cuba." I mean, everybody's 5'9" because we're not there for signal reports. It's contact in the log. 5'9's a protocol. And then they would say, "What's your call?" And I could only laugh and say, "How could you call me without knowing who I am?" I'm identifying every 2 or 3 calls. I'm not the guy who will just say QRZ for 10 minutes because the rest of the pileup knows who I am, or people are trusting the spotting clusters because that could change in a minute. The frequency drops and someone takes it. You don't know who you're calling. Listen to my identification. What I'm saying. If I'm taking calls quickly, I don't need you to come in and start telling me your life story. I don't, not that I don't care. I don't want to be rude, but we don't care. We don't need to know where you live, what the weather is, how far you are from the more popular part of your state, what you're using, how old your antenna is, how long your coax is. We don't need that. We need your call sign. I say it back to you. You say thank you 7-3, and I say I might not even say it. I might say ciao because that's me. But my hunters, and it seems that 85% of all our calls were POTA. As I mentioned, we got 13,966, 11,081 are POTA members because I do the database checking. I have it like that. I can do that. So I was very happy to see that the bulk of our callers were POTA, and out of that 11,081, 10,000 knew I was me. They knew my voice, my style, and they would say, "Hey, James, it's great to hear you from there." Many of them knew beforehand I was going because I promoted it. But for those who didn't, they were surprised. Wow, when I heard your voice from with that call sign, we never know where you're going to pop up. So that made it a little bit interesting. But the key is to listen, follow the activator's lead, keep the pace they're keeping. If they're asking people for your state, how's the weather there? If the pileup is slow, I'm happy to talk. As I said, I'm a talker, but I know how to run a pileup with a high rate when I need to, and I guess that's why I'm invited to these missions to help, deliver the call to as many people as possible. When calling in, don't give a partial; it screws us up. We're listening for whole calls, prefixes, and suffixes together. I may only hear a partial and respond to it. You might call W1 Delta Echo Delta. I might only hear Echo Delta, complete your call. But if you just call in with Echo Delta or Whiskey 1 or DED, not even using phonetics, I'm not going to respond to that because it slows me down to then say, all right, who's DED? Then you have to do it again. you may think from your side, oh, that's just a second or two or three. But seconds count when you need to keep a rate. Imagine 10, let's say 8 calls a minute. That's, what is that, 11 seconds a call? Not even. I can't do the math now. But 10 a minute is 6 seconds per call, right? If you go by 60 seconds, 10 a minute, 6 seconds to make a contact and move on. And you could do that if everybody follows the rules. The Europeans are great for that. Call sign, acknowledge, they say 7-3 and they're gone. And that if that takes 5 seconds, it's a lot. But the guy who wants to occupy 20, 30, 40 seconds of my time by telling me about, his operating conditions, his name, what his call sign was before, that's just information we don't need. So follow the activator. Stick with the rhythm they set. Give your full call. When you're calling into us, don't try to be so official and say, Charlie Oscar Zero, Romeo Romeo Charlie. This is Kilo Bravo 2, Foxtrot Mike Hotel. We're not in the military. We're not in law enforcement. We don't need to acknowledge both call signs every time. This isn't some net, some rag chew. It's an expedition for speed. I know my call. When you start speaking, I start typing. By the time I realize that's my call, son of a bitch, I'm hitting backspace, delete, F12, depending on the software. And then I got to say, what's your call? I know mine. Give me yours, just yours. Some people say it twice again. Once I say, okay, you're in the log, 7-3, don't say, all right, this is Whiskey 1 Delta Echo Delta signing off. Just stop talking. You're in the log. That's what you want. That's what we want. Shut up. Not to be rude. I'm smiling as I say this. You're done. Let the next guy get the chance. Time could be limited. Conditions can drop wherever you are on the planet within minutes, and we'd experience that. I'd have pileups, 500 deep. It sounds like, and then within moments, I could barely hear people at an S2, S3. Lo and behold, on our noise level there on most bands was zero. Nothing that Cuba has emits RF lighting and stuff. Maybe because they're on a different, they're operating not 60 hertz. They're 220 at maybe 50 hertz. So it wasn't interfering with us. Our noise level was mostly dead. We had about an S5 on 80 meters. Not too much voice on that. I think I made 10 calls, 10 voice calls on 80, but we did a lot of CW, a lot of digital on 80 meters. And I mean a true 80, down below 3,800, not 75. We stayed in the DX area, 37, 90, 92, 93, the DX window. Because that's, you follow the protocols of frequency, not allocations, accepted use for frequency ranges when you can. Everywhere else, we tried to stay in the U.S. general, but we couldn't do it on 80 because that's not the band plan for DXing. So we were below the general portion. I'm sorry, generals, upgrade. That's the way to go. You want us? Upgrade.
James, before we wrap up, what else is on your list for callers?
If we're calling you and we need a correction, if you call in and I say, all right, Whiskey 1 Delta Echo, what's the last letter? I only want that last letter. I don't want you to say Whiskey 1 Delta Echo Delta. I got that. You might not have a strong voice that accentuates every syllable. I might hear you saying one type of syllable, a consonant but not a vowel, or a vowel and not a consonant. Not everybody's voice has the strength, and I don't want to be offensive and tell somebody, "Hey, you have a weak voice. I can't hear you." I just say I'm having difficulty, or I might hear the Delta Echo Delta uh, prefix only, number only. Give what the activator asks for. Don't keep saying your entire call. It takes up time, might be nanoseconds, but time is important when propagation rules the game. That nature sets the rules. We don't have a choice. So if I ask you, what's the letter between the deltas? Because I heard delta, because D comes out of your mouth hard. D, delta. But echo, it's kind of soft. You have a soft voice. Not you, but in general, could be. So I say, I heard the delta, delta. Give me the missing letter. Fill in the blank. Don't give me the whole call again, because I'll hear the whiskey. I'll hear the one maybe, but I won't hear that echo again. That's what I'm trying to determine. Use alternate phonetics. If you're saying echo and I'm not hearing it, and you know I'm an American, you know what? Try Eisenhower. Try I don't know what other letters with E. Expert. Uh, Ecuador. That's a popular one. Ecuador, because it sounds different than echo. Echo might be tango because I'm hearing the O part because your voice isn't pushing the eh. You don't have that sharpness, or maybe you do, but your mic settings were never adjusted, and you're on a stock mic which doesn't have as wide of a range. Articulate clearly. Articulation. There was never a point where when I was identifying, and I'm doing it right now, just so you can tell the difference. I'm articulating absolutely. I'm not saying slang words or soft cutting short. I am articulating very clearly, and I would say kilo bravo 2, not kilowatt. That's two words. It's kilo. It's foxtrot. Sometimes I'll say fox for short, or Florida, but it's kilo bravo number 2 foxtrot Mike Hotel. Articulated clearly. There's nobody in any language who won't understand that, because English is the universal call sign language in DXing. If two French are talking to each other, they're going to talk in French, and that's fine. But when a Foxtrot 1 calls me, or a Florida 4, he's using English and he's articulating well. And I'll repeat his call. He'll say thank you, and I'll say 7-3 next. No waste of time. As I said, the Europeans are experts at this. Obnoxious desperados. They'll call over everybody. If I'm asking for Whiskey 1 Delta, I'll keep hearing Italy Uniform 4 until I have to say Italy Station. Forget it. Stop calling. Stop. Or even after you confirm, they want to tell you many thanks and 7-3 to you and your family. Yeah, thanks a lot. Goodbye. Follow the lead of the activator. Sometimes it's more than just a casual park activation. We love making, I personally love making an expedition into a POTA with the park. So we're always going to try to find a park wherever we go in the future. So thanks for having me, Kevin. I hope I've helped some people understand.
James, this has been super helpful for me and I'm sure to a lot of other people. So thank you for taking the time today. And frankly, I can't wait to get you back on the air again to hear about your next DXpedition.
To learn more about this one, go to QRZ.com, punch in Charlie Oscar 0, Romeo Charlie, hit enter, scroll down. There's a slew of photographs I put up of us operating, and a link to some videos on YouTube. I made a playlist of things that not a couple of them I made, but most of them are callers who were just so excited to see how strong we were. Nothing beats a kilowatt and a half and an antenna in the ocean. That's the way to go. But they were so happy they sent me videos or just audio recordings of whether myself or our CWR banging out the tones, and the other voice operator Jose, who's as fast as me but in Spanish. He's that good. I would, the old saying in the plumber's world of who if you couldn't do your own repair at home, who would you ask to do it? That means that's a good plumber. If I couldn't operate, I would say operate on my behalf to this guy Jose. He was that good, that fast, and he loves it just the same way I do. But he doesn't have the opportunities I do because when we leave with our kilowatts, they're back to 100 watts or 500 watts, and sometimes it takes that extra boost. So check the QRZ page, follow the links. Um, you don't have to click like. You don't have to donate. We didn't want any money for this. It wasn't like the Kiska where we needed heavy funding. This was this was something we could all absorb as a regular vacation, and it was a lot of fun. And we can't wait to do it again to give the hunters and chasers of parks and islands and just contacts the opportunity to get a faraway, cool, exotic place while we have fun, sitting there melting in the heat or freezing in the cold. That's what it's all about.
I've been talking to James Gallo, KB2FMH. Thank you for the conversation, James.
All right, Kevin. 7-3.